Welcome to Real Fixes Real Fast, another webinar, which is a mini training session. This one is called How to Think Through a Problem. Now, if you're an experienced tech, you're probably going to be bored. Likewise, if you're a do-it-yourselfer, we're probably going to be over your head. But if you're an apprentice level technician, this is for you. You've been working for a while, you've got tools, you know how to change parts, but when it comes to diagnostics, that's where you struggle. You're just not quite sure how to proceed or how to think through the problem. We're going to show you how to gather evidence, how to put the pieces together in this puzzle that's in front of you, how to eliminate the things that are not the problem so that you can discover what is the problem. So let's begin. We're working on a 94 Postal LLV. That's the same thing as a Chevy S10. Now the complaint is intermittently it will run rough. As always, this is a real problem. We're showing something that was real. And it's not easy. In fact, intermittents are hard. Intermittents will challenge even an experienced tech. Now here's the situation. You're working at a shop. The lead technician is off on vacation. A vehicle comes in, this one, and the service writer gives it to you to figure out. So think that way as we're going through. Now when this came in, we actually had the car for 2 days. It ran for 2 days fine, no problem. And then all of a sudden it started running rough. Very intermittent problem. And it feels like an ignition miss. Now you should recognize your gut feeling here, but don't get tunnel vision and focus just on that. And as always, you do a visual check. Open the hood, look things over, see what you can see if there's anything real obvious. Now this, remember, it felt like an ignition miss, so in looking at the spark plugs you can tell right away the spark plugs really look in pretty good shape. Now for the sake of teaching in this video, to make it easier to see, we've got another engine just like this one out on the engine stand where I can point to things and make it clearer for you to see. In checking the spark on this system, you've got two coils. It's a 4-cylinder engine. This coil fires 2 plugs at the same time, and this coil fires 2 at the same time. It's a waste spark system. So the way that you're going to check for spark on this is with the engine running, coming through the wheel well, grab your spark plug and pull it off the coil, and you should see it arcing across here. If that's the case, that part of the coil is good. Then you do the same thing here. If you don't want to risk getting shocked, you can actually clamp a timing light around each one of these, and if the timing light lights, then the spark is there present in the plug. So all 4 of these sparked. That tells you the coils are good. It also tells you that the computer, which commands these coils on, is good, at least on the spark side. Now we're going to take these wires and follow them back to the spark plug. Now you have evidence that the coils are good and the computer on the spark side is good. We're going to proceed up the wires to the spark plugs. You can pull the spark plug boots off. Now what I like to do is install a kV tester. It's a spark tester, but you can rotate it to change the gap to show whether or not you've got 10, 20, 30 or more kV, how strong that spark is. I like to put it out to 30. You hook it on the spark plug down there, you crank the engine, and if it sparks across that gap of 30 kilovolts, you know you've got a good spark. Now in this engine we did that. We had good spark at all 4 spark plugs. Again, evidence. The computer is good on the spark side, the coils are good, the spark plug wires are good. Now if you want to take it one step further, you can take this off, actually take the spark plug out, put it in there, ground the electrode to a ground somewhere, crank an engine, and if you see it sparking across there, then that's going to tell you that you're sparking completely through the plug. So we got more evidence. The spark plugs are good all the way through, all 4 of them. So now you're going to make another decision. You're going to have to try and isolate which cylinder is the problem. To do that, we want to do a cylinder contribution test. You pull the spark plugs off while it's running, one at a time, and you listen. If there is no change, that means that cylinder is not contributing to power. If there is a change in sound, then it is contributing, and you're pulling it away and the engine will stall or stumble. Now we did that on this engine. When we pulled number 1 off, there was no contribution. You heard no change. When we pulled number 2 off, the engine stalled. Put it back on, pulled number 3 off, the engine stalled. Started back up, pulled number 4 off, there was no change. So 2 and 3, when removed, stall the engine. 1 and 4, no contribution. More evidence. Now let's think about this for a minute. You got 4 cylinders. Each cylinder should be contributing 25%. When you pull off number 2, the engine died. Now you should have just been removing 25%. The engine should still run off 75% power, but remember, number 1 and 4 weren't contributing. They weren't contributing any power. So when you took one plug off, number 2, you've lost 75% of the power, and it's not going to run off just 25%. So now you decide, let's see how strong the cylinders are. It's time for a compression check. I'm not going to go into a compression check on this video, but we did a compression check and we had 150 pounds on all 4 cylinders. So all 4 cylinders should be contributing equally to power. More evidence. So compression is good. Now you can also assume here that timing is okay, because remember, it was running fine for 2 days. But timing is almost never intermittent. So I wouldn't be chasing timing here. I'm trying to find why I've lost 2 cylinders. So it must be fuel, right? We've checked everything else out. You've got the pieces to this puzzle. You're putting them together. We're down to checking fuel. We did a fuel pressure check and we had 30 psi. The spec is 30 to 32, so we're right at the right point. We've got adequate fuel pressure. Now that doesn't mean we have adequate fuel delivery. Okay, keep in mind, 2 and 3 stall. They're contributing. 1 and 4, no change. They're not contributing. So did we lose 2 injectors? Did we lose number 1 and 4 injector? Possibly, but not likely. But since it's possible, we've got to know for sure. Since you've got to know, means you've got to test. So how are we going to test? A fuel pressure leak down is the best way. When you do a fuel pressure leak down test, you turn the key on, you power up the fuel pump, powers up the fuel rail, pressurizes the fuel rail, and you have fuel ready to be squirted. Remember, injectors are just simply squirt guns. They're full of fuel, and when you trigger them, they should squirt. So when we power up the fuel pump, if we trigger that injector, the pressure should actually drop. If it doesn't, that means the injector did not squirt. Now to activate the fuel injectors, of course you have to have access to them. They're down underneath the fuel rail. They're hard to get to, but we've got to access them. Now in my case, I don't think it's likely that we lost 2. So I'm not real fond of the idea of taking this intake off to get access to them unless I suspected that. So what's another way that we can do it? Since the injectors are electrical, they have wires running to them. We don't have to get to the injector. We can move backwards to this point where the injector connector comes together. Now we've got 3 wires with a pink, a blue, and a green. You've got 3 wires, 4 injectors. How can that be? Let's look at the electrical diagram. Now in the electrical diagram you see that there is a pink wire going to each injector. That is battery plus, battery power. So each injector has power with key on. You can see that injector number 4 and 1 have a blue wire, and injector number 2 and 3 have a green wire. The PCM is controlling the injectors in pairs. It fires number 1 and 4 at the same time and 2 and 3 at the same time by giving them ground. Remember, they've already got power. Now here's a fuel injector that we want to power on. Remember, this thing is submerged down in the fuel rail. The only thing we have access to is the 2 pins inside there. There's 2 pins. It tells you there's power and ground. Look at your wiring diagram. It has 12 volts. It has battery power. One side needs battery plus, the other side needs ground, and then it should fire. You can use a fuel injector tester like this if you have one. It'll actually give a single or a multiple pulse. If you don't have one of those, you can actually just use a power probe. Again, the fuel injector only needs power and ground. You can provide that with the power probe and power that injector on. When we give power to the pink and ground the green, the fuel pressure drops. That tells us that the injectors are actually squirting fuel. Now when we give power to the pink and ground the blue, the pressure drops. Again, that tells us that number 1 and 4 injectors do squirt fuel. More evidence.